ask that everyone please be seated. It is 8:30 a.m. on this August the 2nd, 103-degree day, and we call this meeting to order. We will start today with our chaplain prayer and pledges, and we have today Police Chaplain Lorenzo Hatch here to lead us in both.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Bow your heads with me. Gracious Father, we thank you so much for this day that we can gather in your name and to deliberate as a council. Lord, we ask that you stretch your mighty hand upon our nation, upon all of our leaders, especially our local leaders. Lord, be with their agenda today and inspire them to respond to the needs of our community. And Lord, we ask that you bless and protect all our brave men and women who serve in our police and our fire department. And lastly, Lord, we continue to ask you to remember us and please and send us rain for our community. These and all things we ask in your mighty name. Amen. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one indivisible. Thank you. Excuse me. There are no proclamations today, so we will start with public comment. Public comment, you must state your name and address or SMD. Each citizen can speak just once per item unless asked to comment by council. Public comment, 3 minutes unless extended by counsel or translation services. The proponent or opponent, 5 minutes unless extended by counsel or translation services. Council has no obligation to respond to comments or questions from the public. Any response from a member of the City Council to non-agenda comments is limited to a statement of specific factual information, recitation of existing policy, and directing staff to place a subject on a future agenda. Are there individuals in the audience today who would like to come forward and offer public comment? Seeing none, we will now move into the consent agenda. Larry, do you have anything you want to pull from the consent agenda? Karen?
D and F.
Lucy?
I believe it's G, Mayor.
Harry?
Item P.
Item P. Tom?
They've already got it, so we're good.
Okay. And Tommy?
Already got it.
Okay. With that, may I have a motion for approval of the consent agenda with the exception of items D, F, G, and P?
So moved.
So moved by Harry, seconded by Tommy. Any public comment on the consent agenda? Seeing none, we'll take a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0. We will now go to item D, consider amending the June 21st, 2022 purchase via TIPS agreement number 200201 from King's Consulting to Construction Consultants 3 for an amount not to exceed $1,500,000 to update the North Amcon hangar to the Shell rent requirements using $196,204 from the airport fund balance and authorizing the city manager to negotiate and execute all related documents. Jeremy, you're on.
Morning, Mayor, Council,
Morning.
and staff. Representing your airport today. This item, as you see, it came before you in June, and this was to do all the Shell rent requirements for the AMCOM hangar. This was just an oversight on my part. When we started the negotiation process, everything he sent in was on King's paperwork, he has the two companies, they're sister companies. So when I made the actual agenda item, it was on King's. When I asked for the TIPS number, he gave me the TIPS number. The TIPS number is registered for construction consultants. The vendor actually in the city system is King's because he does the asbestos removal. So because it's such a broad scope of what he does, he put it underneath his construction consulting services. So it wasn't until after council had already approved the agreement and purchasing caught it as we submitted the requisition for payment. So nothing's been paid, no work has been done yet. We just need to change the name from the sister company to the parent company because King's is not actually on the TIPS agreement. It's construction
We've already
consultant.
approved the $1.5 million previously, so it's just a name change on this one. Karen, do you have a further question?
Thank you, Jeremy. You addressed my exact question, so that's perfect. And I'm assuming that legally you can do that. You can transfer that from one entity to another without a rebid. Those were my concerns. Yes. Okay, thank you. Perfect.
Thank you.
All right, item F, consider
Could we get a
accepting a
motion to
memorandum.
approve- Could we get a motion to approve that item?
We can do it one at a time, or we can go through all of them and then ask if we can present the four.
We can do it either way.
Yeah, we'll do them as
Typically do
four.
it individually.
Okay, item F, consider accepting a memorandum of understanding between Texas Pacifico Transportation LTD and the City of San Angelo for railway improvements as a part of the Southwest Boulevard Rehabilitation Project and authorizing the city manager to execute all related documents. Patrick, you're on.
Good morning, Mayor, Council. This is a memorandum of understanding with Texas Pacifico as part of that Southwest project. We've completed most of the roadway, and now we're up to the railway portion. Pacifico recently went in a couple weeks ago and raised that railway to meet our roadway elevation. What this part of it is we're adding a sidewalk along that west side that doesn't exist right now. Well, incorporated into that sidewalk and those pedestrian elements is a pedestrian gate so that the kiddos don't try to cross the road whenever a train's coming, obviously. So since this is in Texas Pacifico right-of-way, they need to do the work, they need to do the design so it meets their standards and their construction standards as well.
Do we have questions for Patrick?
Thank you, Patrick. You addressed my questions.
All right. Item G, consider a resolution approving the 2022 Annual Action Plan for use of CDBG and home grant funds as approved by City Council on July 7, 2022, and authorizing the city manager to execute the applications, required certifications, related documents, and annual funding agreement for the allocation of $661,943 of CDBG and $337,050 for the home grant funds and $17,800 in program income and $100,000 in prior years funds. Hello, how are you today?
Good morning. Morgan
morning.
Chegwin, Assistant Director of Neighborhood and Family Services. What's before you today is the culmination of the grant preparation process for HUD. So the CDBG grant, the HUD grant, and all program income and prior year funds are encapsulated in the items discussed at the July 7th meeting, which are housing rehab at $130,000, emergency repairs at $111,000, code compliance support at $45,000, debt service obligations of $133,000 and change. And then we have the Home Buyers Assistance Program at $67,000 and change, the CHODO set aside at $285,000, and our MHMR support for rental assistance at $60,000.
Lucy, do you have a question or comment?
Yes, ma'am. Good morning. I wanted to ask you on this community development block grant and the home investment partnership that y'all say is the annual action plan in the summary on here. Can you explain to me a little bit about your plan as far as rehabilitation and the programs for the neighborhood? Can you explain those to me as far as that the constituents can know what they would apply for, what they're eligible for?
Sure. The specific programming is largely unchanged from prior years, so the services that citizens are used to receiving from our department are largely unchanged. So there is the Home Buyers Assistance Program as far as down payment assistance, the Housing Rehab Program where you can make application for support for those kind of services, the emergency repairs, for example, if somebody has water line repairs or, unforeseen items come up that are on the customer side that they can't afford, they can make application to that. The income requirements to qualify for these programs are also listed on our website. It's a sliding, not a sliding scale, but it's determined by household size. So for example, a household of 4 would not exceed this dollar amount, would qualify for this programming. So that housing rehab and emergency repairs are direct support to citizens making application for those programs. The code compliance and the debt service are, the debt service is a legally obligated ongoing loan that we have had for many years, and then the code compliance support helps those officers be back out in the field in those target neighborhoods to ensure they they meet the standards of the neighborhood.
Hey, Morgan, and the $100,000 prior to this year, is that money left over from last year, or where's the $100,000 coming from?
The $100,000 is an accumulation of multiple years of unspent funds, so not simply last year's unspent funds.
So, why was that money not used?
I believe that $100,000 is specifically from our CHODO set aside. So our contracted CHODO is with Galilee, and so as they have eligible clients who can request drawdown of funds, they continue to do that. We want to fully fund our CHODO and make sure that they have ample funds set aside for clients, but it is unfortunately common that there is money left on the table. We just want to reinvest that, make sure we can still match it with eligible citizens.
You don't lose the money.
That's correct.
Do you know by any chance how many people or citizens we might have helped last year?
In total, I don't have the total for all programs, but I can get you that information by detail by each specific program. I'd be happy to do that.
That would be great. Thank you.
On the Blitz program, where is it in neighborhood services?
It is under Neighborhood and Family Services, but it's not funded through these program dollars. And so what you're considering today in the annual action plan is simply HUD dollars and program income off of HUD dollars. The Blitz is funded with local dollars and would come in a separate council action.
But in the past, the Blitz program has always been presented. In fact, it was taken away 2 years ago, and Bob told us that there was such a need and so many people wanted that Blitz program put back in, so he put it back in last year. I want to make sure that the Blitz program continues forward because it has been a very important program. And just because siding has gone up in terms of expense does not change the need for the Blitz program. I just want to go on record on that.
Yes, I acknowledge that. I think that that's really valuable for sure. The plan as it's presented today would need to be considered just to meet the statutory requirements of the grant, but there is ample time to research local funding and amending the grant at a future date.
So I need to make sure that happens.
For sure. Yes, ma'am. Noted.
Lucy, do you have further questions?
No, ma'am, I do not. I'll move to.
No, we're not
Oh, okay.
moving yet.
Okay. Sorry.
We're sitting still for a minute. Item P is the last item on consent agenda for consideration and conversation, and it is second reading of an ordinance for Z 22-15 to rezone properties from two-family residential zoning district to office commercial zoning district being .23 acres located at 103 and 107 West 14th. Who pulled this one? Harry, go ahead.
My only question on this, John, is I thought previously that when we had a split vote on the first reading that we brought it back under the regular agenda and not under the consent. And that's my only question.
And the vote was what?
5-2.
5-2.
Yeah, I think we have done that in the past. I don't know that.
Is it required?
We've always done it, but.
No, so
Yeah.
y'all can vote on it now again, and, or if you need any more information, we'd be happy to give that to you.
Do you need more information? Anybody? No? Okay, so I think that was asked and answered. With that, then I would entertain a motion for items D, F, G, and P. May I have that motion?
So
Move
moved.
to approve.
Motion has been made by Tommy, seconded by Lucy. We will take a vote. All those in favor?
Mayor, could we get public comment on that, just in
We
case?
sure could. Is there some? Is there any? Seeing none and hearing none, we will take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
None opposed. Consent agenda is passed 7-0. We will now move into our regular agenda. Comments regarding items on the regular agenda may be made by the public when each item is discussed as outlined above. Applicants, proponents, and appellants are exempt from the time limit above and instead must limit their remarks to less than 5 minutes. Item A, consider matters related to request for proposal HR-02-22. 1, discussion of proposals submitted for benefits regarding medical, pharmacy, clinic, dental, and life/AD&D. And 2, consider selecting benefit providers, authorizing staff to negotiate contracts, and authorizing the city manager to execute all related documents. And we have today Director Brian Kendrick here.
Yes, and we'll also have Julie Rickman from Holmes Murphy. She'll be presenting most of the details. I just kind of wanted to give an overview. So good morning, Mayor, City Council. As you will probably remember from last year's budget cycle, I warned of the upcoming increase to health insurance that you know is around the corner because we've held it back creatively and kind of reestablished baselines over the last several years. And I didn't think we'd be able to do that for another year, but as it turns out, one of the relationships that we started a couple of years ago come to fruition this coming fiscal year. And so I believe we've been able to keep that tide from coming in quite yet. So with that being said, I'll introduce Julie Rickman. She'll go through the presentation and I'll be available for any questions as well.
Good morning, Council.
Someone help her with getting her slides up.
And to start off with, my name is Julie Rickman with Holmes Murphy. Jason Newman was going to be here to present today, but you can see that I'm not Jason Newman. I've had the pleasure, though, of working with the City of San Angelo for many years, so I can answer any questions that you might have regarding the RFP process. We're going to go a little bit about budget and then the RFP itself when it comes to the benefits that we talked about for today. So first of all, I wanted to start back and go and show you a little look back on your medical and your pharmacy claims and how your trend has been running over the last several years. And you can see right now you're running about 8.7%, meaning that the cost of services have gone up for the city of San Angelo, 8.7%. The bumpy line is where your actual month-over-month pieces are. The red line is actually a trended outline that regresses it and shows it as kind of just a slope, a standard slope. I will tell you.
So on that slope, where it goes up above the red line, is that primarily impacted by COVID?
Part of it was impacted by COVID. Part of it could just be a large claim for those specific months. So sometimes you'll have a really large claim on a specific month, and then it'll drop down the next few months. You can see some COVID pieces that happened kind of in that 2020 area where you dropped down a little bit in April 2020 or so. You've been progressing under your trend line over the last several months, in fact, which is a positive for you as well. COVID does definitely have some effect, though, overall on your trend. It does for everyone at this point. So when we're saying that you're looking forward and we're going at 8.7%, you're pretty good in line with what the market is showing right now as well.
What's the market showing?
Depends on where you're going. We have a Siegel survey that we do and then different carriers that you go through. So I've seen it anywhere from about 8% to about 9.5% on medical. So you're doing well. When we look at your pharmacy trend, we've had conversations in the past about pharmacy, and you have rebates that happen with your pharmacy as people spend dollars. So without rebates, your trend is at 13.6%. But with pharmacy rebates, you're looking at 7.2%, which is really under trend. So trend on that is a little bit more like
Where do
that
those
8.5,
rebates
9.
come from?
Those come from from the drugs that your employees actually use. So there's rebates that happen back from the carriers that give you dollars back for the medications that your folks are using. And that happens a couple times a year for you all, and you get dollars that come back through to the city as people use pharmacy. So I will say for both your medical and your pharmacy, when we're looking at at the very end where you see that $185.84, that's per participant per year. Those are under what I normally see. I work specifically with municipalities and public entities, and your medical and your pharmacy is well under what I see for most of my employers. So you're running really well. That has a lot to do with the contract negotiations that we have on your medical. And just looking at this, it's a very positive outlook considering what I've seen in the marketplace, especially recently. Wanted to talk a little bit about pharmacy in a little bit more detail as well. Holmes Murphy and the city, we partner with a company called Honest RX, and Honest RX is an organization that works specifically on pharmacy. So while we're your consultants and we work on pharmacy, they get into the nitty-gritty and all the details of your pharmacy. What they do is they do a semi-annual review of your formulary changes. So every year, your medical carrier and your pharmacy carrier goes through and says, we're changing these medications up and down tiers depending on if something is no longer a generic or if something new comes to the market, and they take a look at that and determine what we should be doing for the members of your plan. They also do a full annual audit of your pharmacy claims to ensure that your plan is paying the way that it needs to pay for your pharmacy claims and making sure that that's running the way appropriately. They have ongoing claims assistance, so if someone has maybe a medication that they're having trouble getting a hold of, or maybe not finding the right thing that they can use for the plan, we go back and we help them with that as well. They help with that as well. They do evaluation of your rebates, making sure that we're getting the best bang for our buck and making sure that the carrier is giving us the fullest amount of rebate that we can. That does, again, you saw how much it keeps your trend lower when we're receiving the best rebates that we can. They also help us with analysis of your pharmacy RFP to ensure that all of your RFP pieces are done in an appropriate manner and that we're getting what we can for the city of San Angelo at the best price. So again, medical industry trend, 7.3%. Pharmacy industry trend is 8.4%. That goes up and down depending on what carrier you're looking at and what you're doing. When we're looking at this, for this particular plan year going forward, we're looking at no plan design changes. So your members on the plan will not experience any changes to either pharmacy or medical. The only exception to that is on pharmacy. Your formulary changes a little bit every year. About 3 to 4% of your folks will be affected by that. But in general, no changes for folks. We were showing your claims experience through May of 2022 and your current enrollment numbers when we're looking at how we're budgeting for you all.
Talk about those.
Current enrollment numbers, I have those a couple slides forward. So I'll go back through those real quick. So we have a couple options when we talk about funding for this upcoming plan year. Really what we're looking at is a couple of different pieces. So one is if we're looking at optimistic rebates. So the pharmacy rebates go up and down to what you've said before. It depends on actually what your folks are using for their medications. We look back at what you've done in the past, and that's how we can kind of come up with those average numbers of what we would expect. But when we're looking at this overall, if we have a funding option and we're optimistic in your rebates, at a 2.5% increase for both the city and for employees, we can level out your budget and get you at a surplus or deficit of 0 and kind of net you out at a 2.5% increase. The other option to this is if we are looking to put the entire dollar amount onto the city, we're looking at 3.2% increase and no increase to your members. I'll show you what those numbers look like as far as their premiums go. The reason why, obviously, the difference between the 2.5% and 3.2% is the employees pay fewer dollars than the city does. And so when we try and put it all into the city, it comes out to that 3.2%. If you look at the revenue increase, if we're looking at 2.5% for a city increase, you're looking at $175,000 of increase annually. And if you're looking at the 3.2% and taking that full amount on, that is $221,000 of increase on your spend. Any questions?
Go back to that previous slide. And the claims for May 2022 compared to the previous year would be what?
From May of 20, well, I can show you kind of on this chart. I don't have the exact number, but if you're looking at previous year, when we're looking at how your May of 2022, we don't necessarily look at May of 2021 to compare to May of 2022. We take your trend and we average it out over a longer period of
Chart would
time.
reflect that.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
The other option that we are bringing to the table as far as funding goes is, and let me go ahead and show you for option one. So one of the questions that we'll always have is, how does that affect members and how much would that be per pay period? So if you look at the current monthly rates at the top, and then you have the proposed monthly rates, the bottom is per month increase for each individual per tier. So the E stands for employee, S is employee plus spouse, the C is employee plus child or children, and then the F is employee plus their family. So you can see that on the low plan, which
What's
is
the difference between family and child?
you don't include your spouse. So when we're looking at the child plan, it's just an employee plus their children, and when you're looking at family plan, it's employee plus children plus spouse. So if you're looking at the lowest tier, and I'll show you the enrollment numbers as well, but the lowest tier on your low plan, employee only, it's 51 extra cents a month. So and that's that 2.5% increase for folks. The most increase that you would see is on your high plan, family coverage. You're looking at $26.86 per month on that one.
And when you say high, medium, and low, what's high, what's medium, and what's low? What are you talking about?
You have 3 different plan designs that the employees of the city of San Angelo can select from. So the low plan is the one that is what most of your folks are in, and that's just a plan design, a little bit higher co-pays, maybe a little bit more out of pocket. The high plan is fewer dollars out of pocket, but the premiums are a little higher.
Okay.
This, of course, is a city-only increase. If we were looking at only increasing for the city, obviously, then at that 3.2%, then you have no increases to your employees for any of those monthly pieces. The other option that we're looking at for funding is if we decided that we're going to be a little bit more moderate with our rebates and determine that we're not going to receive as large rebates back.
Why would we do that?
It depends on how aggressive or moderate you want to be in your projections. So when we're looking at...
What have we been in the past? What's the trend line?
Sorry.
I would say most of the time we've been pretty optimistic, and when I say optimistic and moderate, it might not be what other people mean. It's not pie in the sky numbers. We feel that either one of these are probably within the realm of achievability, and I think the 2.5% is achievable. The only reason we're putting the 5% in there at all is not that we don't think we can do that, but we don't have a healthy fund balance compared to what we would want there. And I know that exists in multiple funds, and so I understand the reality of municipal budgeting. I just wanted to put this before you.
But you're doubling
as
it.
a body. Well,
I mean, if you go from 2.5 to 5, you're doubling it. There's
Right.
got to be something in between 2.5 and 5.
well, and you could choose anything. Those are the two that we selected from, because essentially this would add approximately $200,000 to the fund balance.
Yeah.
It's not a huge amount, and we're just
What impact in the past year on fund balance has happened?
we've been almost zero. So we're doing well. Like I said, we've been what I would say is optimistic, and we've hit those numbers. And just to kind of track back to earlier in the presentation when you were seeing those 7.7% on the medical and 7.6 or 7.3 on the 8.7 on the medical and 7.2 on the pharmacy. Those are, again, if you go back to June of 18, that's what we should really be at. But some of the creative things that we've done have kept that from from existing. So if we were to go with the 2.5% increase this year, we will average a 2% increase over the last 4 years since I've been in HR. And if you take that back 5 more years, so that you can see that that trend line is not something we're making up or saying that, oh, look, we're doing well. We were trending at 9.2% for the previous 5 years. If we would have kept on that trajectory, this number that's 562.55 here on the yes, that would be we'd be asking for 767. So we really have held that tide back. Through, one of the things we did was we bid pharmacy separate than medical. That was 2018 or 2019. 2020, we started the relationship with Honest RX. We're starting to see this will be the full fruition of that. That's what I was mentioning. We're going to get more rebates than we have in the past because we haven't had somebody being able to go to that level and make sure we're receiving those things. So all these things that we've done over this time have really reset that baseline. And I just want to mention that because so many people think that in municipal government that you might not be fiscally responsible, but we
don't think that.
We are fiscally responsible, and I want to point that out that we have worked hard to keep this number opposed to the overall industry percentages. And so we have done that. 2.5% is as y'all all know, we're experiencing 9.1% inflation. Typically, I think medical typically will outpace inflation. It's held back by about a year, from what I understand, but from talking to Chief. So it takes a little while because contracts are in place. It takes a little while for that inflation to really hit medical. So it's a good time for us to get a 3-year contract.
And what we are talking about is a 3-year contract?
Yes, ma'am. And I believe we have 2 one-year options in this, so we could keep this for 5 years, which is huge for us to make sure that we're stable in this fund overall. And so I just didn't want to miss the opportunity to point that out, that when we're saying 2.5%, it really is against a trend line of around 7.5 to 9. Depending on whoever's plan is being managed. So, and I would like to thank my staff for working hard to make sure we're watching everything, and Holmes Murphy has been a great partner in that. And so it just can't be overstated the difference that this really makes to the overall budget, I think.
I'm going to stop right now and just see if there's questions at the presentation at this point, and then we'll move forward. Tom?
I want to go to the RX question, and it's simpler. So we go through and we audit, and they give a rebate. So do our employees get the rebate? Does the city as a policyholder get the rebate? How is that split?
It's an offset back to your medical spend and your pharmacy spend. So basically, we receive the dollars back that goes back against basically just goes back into your account, and then you use that to be able to offset the cost of your claims.
Okay, so those are kind of predetermined then, right?
Yes and no. It's predetermined because we can get an assumption based on how your spend has been in the past, but rebates are really dependent on what your employees use and the drug mix that they use. So we can do, because of our experience and how much we do this, we get an idea. That's why we can kind of give you a little bit more aggressive or a little bit more moderate. So we can do an actuarial value and a best guess based off of how you currently use medical spend and pharmacy spend and how you've done it in the past.
Okay, so you've answered this. I'm going to throw one out to Brian. Brian, have we had any objections, or have you had any complaints about using Honest RX?
Oh, no, absolutely not. The end user doesn't even see that and wouldn't. And I missed a point. I do want to kind of say thank you to Shannon. They were very fair in this bid process, which without them being a partner in the community, we wouldn't be where we are. So I don't want that can't be overstated as well. But yep.
I'm good. Thanks, Mayor.
Okay. Any other questions at this point in the presentation? Lucy?
You're going to ask it, right?
Oh, well,
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, we were wondering, what is the EE funding? What does that stand for?
Employee funding. Those are your employee dollars. So we take that based off of what your employees currently, what tiers they're currently in, and your actual enrollment currently, and then that comes up with the number of what your employees are actually spending towards your medical plan.
Yeah, actually figured out that part of it was employee. We didn't know what the other E stood for.
Well, so
Yeah.
go ahead and describe what PEPM is.
Per employee per month. Yeah, it's insurance. We like to do a lot of acronyms, but also I think for just the purpose of this, just to keep it smaller on the.
It's okay, as long as
slide
we
of
know
the-
what we're talking about.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, any further questions at this point in the presentation? Okay, continue.
So moving forward, I'm going to go back over to the option 2 where we talk about the 5% increase. So if we're looking at a 5% increase to employee and 5% increase
I
to
don't
the
think
city.
we're going for that one.
Okay. I can move forward unless anyone wants me to spend a little bit more time on this one. Okay. And this is what the spend would be, the increase per month if we were looking at a 5% increase. So I will move forward from there. This is where your current plan enrollment is. Mary, you had actually asked about this a few moments ago. So to what I said before, most of your employees are sitting in that employee-only tier on the low plan. So you see 688 folks are sitting on that, and you can kind of see the spread across the other tiers are relatively nominal when we talk about the total amount of employees that you have in the plan. So when we're looking at those increases at the 2.5%, again, that employee-only at 688, I'll go back so you can just take a look at it because I know that's
Yeah,
important.
go back to that screen we were
Yes.
just on. Okay, would somebody add that 688-58129 and 92 up, please? The total number.
I'm sorry, the
Okay, so just for reference, how many employees do we have totally? $999 or
Approximately 880 on the plan. It can vary.
around 900.
Yeah.
and how many
Can-
employees do we have?
If we were fully staffed, it'd be over 900, but we
That's all right.
have some vacancies.
I thought it was closer to 1,000. So basically, a majority of our employees take advantage of the plan.
Yes, and the vast majority of those obviously take
Yeah.
advantage of the employee only, which is the lowest amount.
Yeah, because some have people who work in other companies and their medical is covered there, so.
TRICARE or something along those lines, but they elect not to be in the plan.
Medicare.
Yeah,
Medicaid.
Medicare, yeah, we have our Medicare offering that we have for your employees too, but yeah, once they reach over the age of 65, they could be on a Medicare plan. But yeah, the majority of our folks are on the plan.
That's good.
I have a question.
Yes, Lucy?
Can you explain to me, you have the employee and then the spouse, the children, and the family. Is that number 688, and out of that 688, 58 is paying for spouse? Or
No,
what is
that is 688 people have employee-only coverage on the low plan. There's 58 folks that have employee plus spouse coverage on that plan. So each little bucket is where the people are sitting at. So it's not cumulative, it's individual buckets for how many people are sitting in each
The
plan.
majority is in the low, so when we look at everything, moving to the next slides, we should concentrate on the low, because that's where the majority focus is.
Yes, and Michael brought up a good point on the side there that I need to make sure y'all are aware that this does include retirees as well. And so that's the reason these numbers add up to more. If you add all these numbers together, it's going to be quite a bit over.
Your pre-65
Oh, yeah.
retirees.
Yeah.
So yeah, your pre-65 retirees are included in here too. That's how we come up with some of our numbers as well. So when we're looking at that, yes, your low plan is what you really should focus on. Employee-only coverage is what you should focus on. Since we're not doing much we're not doing really anything in the way of plan design changes, really the focus is going to be if you're looking at 2.5% increase for those folks, what that affects them per month, and that's what I was going to go back to there on this as well. So these are the increases that we're talking about, and you can see that the low plan, the dollar increase for employee-only coverage is 51 cents a month. So we're not talking about a lot of money.
And so this is employee contribution as an increase, but not the city picking up the total.
Not the total, correct.
Okay,
So
just to be clear.
Both the city, and in this particular scenario, it's both the city and employees take 2.5% increase.
Got it?
So you can see again, when I talked about that high tier and the family plan on the high tier, it's $26.86 a month. And then we're looking at the total number of folks that are in that plan. You'll see that you only have one person in the family high tier that would be affected. So really, it's when we're looking at that low plan is where folks are really migrating towards.
Okay. All right. Keep on going.
So really, I'm going to go moving from medical on to dental. So any other questions on medical before I move on to dental?
No, we're good.
So for the marketing efforts for dental, we actually had 6 vendors respond to your dental RFP. I will tell you that our list is pretty expansive, so 6 is actually a decent number. 4 of them matched our requirements. We had 3 of them that we chose for our best and final offers through that. But really, the overall cost and the network, we were recommending to move forward with dental to Lincoln. And the other piece that we're talking about on your dental plan is you have 2 dental plans. You have a low plan and a high plan. Your high plan has been the same for quite some time, and dental expenses, I'm sure if all of you know, you go to the dentist, $1,500 does not go very far when you have a crown or a root canal or something that you have to get done. So our recommendation was increasing the maximum on your dental plan that folks were able to use from $1,500 to $2,500. I will say that's much more in line with what the market is showing for higher plans. Again, it's that way people don't necessarily have to choose which tooth they're having worked on for this year. They can get a couple different pieces done at the same time. So when we're looking at the rates for individuals, you can see that your current plan under this, the top part is your $1,000 plan, which we consider your low plan. That's $1,000 worth of benefit that they can use annually. You can see right now that your employees and the counts for where tiers people are sitting on is that first column where you see employees only on the low plan. There's 401 of your folks that are on the low plan. Currently, they're paying $21.33. The change would be to Lincoln at $21.54. Across the board, your employees use your dental plan, which is the reason why you see an increase at all. Your folks do use it, and trend has been increasing on that. Usually we see that closer to 3 to 5% on the dental. And then on the dental plan for your high plan, right now we're talking $27.53 for your high plan at a $1,500 benefit. It goes up a little slightly to that $2,500 benefit at $31.70. Increase for your employees overall, but I think it gives them a much better option when it comes to the high plan and a richer benefit in general.
This is in addition to the previous insurance?
Medical
Or is
as
this
well.
included in the medical?
No,
This is
it's
in
separate.
addition to?
It was included in the total amount.
Okay, so this is just breaking it out and separating the specifics like dental and eye, but those numbers are in the total medical?
Yes, that was included.
Just because we
in
want to
the-
make sure we're not talking
Yeah.
about that number plus this number, then plus another number.
Yeah, this is included in that 2.5%,
Okay.
yes. And so will the life, which she's about to speak to.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, so in your budgeting process, we try and take into account all the considerations, including your administrative fees and all those things as well, stop loss and those. So dental, this is the scoring criteria that we had for your dental plans once we had the best and final offers back, and you can see that Lincoln had a 99 out of 100. The other ones, depending on what services they were offering, how closely it matched your current plan designs, and again, if we have renewals and guarantees, so if we have longer guarantees for your rates, then that has additional considerations as well. All of them had great references and all of them adhered to the terms of our RFP, but really when we're looking at this is overall plan design, rates, and then network is a big piece too. We want to ensure that your folks will still have access to as many of the same dentists as they did before and have plenty of access to dentists in the city of San Angelo.
So when we have the 3 that are up there, we're not picking one where people, dentists might choose to use Aetna versus Delta. What are we doing here? So explain that.
Our recommendation is to move forward with Lincoln because of the network and the pricing on that. You're correct. Dentists can choose to be in or out of networks for different carriers. That does happen. But when we do our RFP process for the city, we take into account who your employees currently utilize, and that has a bearing on the scoring criteria as well. So if we have most of your folks are using these dentists and they're also in network with Lincoln, which we found that to be true, then that got a higher scoring criteria than someone that might have some of your highly utilized dentists that were no longer in their network. Any questions on any additional questions on the dental before I move to life insurance?
Move on.
So on the life insurance, our initial response was 6 vendors responded, 5 of them that matched what we were looking for our requirements. We had 3 that we chose for best and final offers. And again, when we're looking at best and final offers, we're looking at overall pricing and plan designs, and that way we can narrow down that field a little bit. When you have 5 respond, we kind of try and narrow that down a bit to determine what would be best for the city. Based on the overall cost, the references, and administrative flexibility, the recommendation was to move forward with the life and AD&D with Symetra. To speak to administrative flexibility, right now your life insurance is a list bill, meaning that it lists every single person that's on the plan. A lot of carriers will require that you do self-accounting, which means that you just give them numbers, and the preference for the city is to have the list bill to indicate who is actually on the plan. So that's a big piece for that. Currently, you have Dearborn National as, sorry, did you have a question?
No,
Okay.
thank you.
Dearborn National is your current life insurance carrier. You can see that Symetra came in with their proposed rate. You can see that it's actually overall going to be a decrease to your total spend for your life insurance of around $7,700 annually, so a very small decrease.
Every dollar counts, though.
Every dollar does count. And overall, it's just I mean, life insurance is one of those benefits that when you need it, you know, it's a pretty simple benefit to administer, but when you need it, you need to ensure that they pay your claims promptly on time. And we have good relationships with Symetra, and we are very confident that they'll be able to treat the city of San Angelo properly.
And so on where it says dependent life, is that the number of employees who have signed up? What is that?
Dependent, so when we're looking at the units, yes, dependent life units is how many folks have dependent life under your basic life insurance plan, correct?
So not a lot.
Not that many on that, no.
Important, but not a lot.
Correct. And you also have the ability for buy-up on voluntary life insurance as well, so people can purchase additional insurance if they need it.
Okay.
This is our scoring criteria when it came to your life insurance benefits. And you can see that overall, Blue Cross did not provide references in this RFP. That's the reason why they scored low. We know who they work with, but they didn't provide them in the RFP process. But overall, you can see the same thing. We look at the administrative services and plan design to make sure they can match your current as much as they can. Fees, renewals, and rate guarantees, that gives us additional scoring, and Symetra scored very high in those references, and then just adherence to the RFP process. Really, that's what it boils down to. Any other questions?
Council, do you have questions? Tom?
So, Brian, I just want to make sure with the vendors that we've been talking to, do the majority of them get accepted at Shannon? Is the majority of everything we're going to do in-network?
There's no disruption at all in what we're presenting. In fact, I mean, of course, as we moved over to Shannon, that gave access that for years with the community relationship, folks didn't have access to some of those doctors. So overall, this is probably the best as far as...
There's no conflict
Right.
in terms of that. Yeah.
And I just want to touch one more time on the reason that we put a 2.5% and a 5% option. You know, one of the things that, you know, they always say in investments is past experience doesn't guarantee future results. We don't know what tomorrow brings.
We don't, okay? We don't, and you can't project it.
Right.
Okay,
and so we're just putting that as an option to build a fund balance against that. I know it's not likely, but we wanted to give y'all that option because I think it's fiscally responsible for me, for the fund.
So it would be 3,
to
or
bring
so it
that.
would be 3.5, so it would be 4, so it would
Right.
4.5.
Absolutely.
5.
Absolutely.
So my
we're
point,
just
yeah.
we're just throwing out there that, you know, anything above 2.5% would add to the fund balance, we think. Doesn't guarantee future results. We might
didn't
have
ask you to guarantee
we might
it.
have a bad year, but I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page there, and it seems like we are.
Thank you. Further questions? All right, thank you for the presentation. All right, we will now move into item B. Yeah. Yeah, sorry. What action do you need? Because generally what we do is we don't make a decision on this until we get into the general fund and further discuss issues. So we generally do not do this at this point. We usually wait and vote on this issue until later, I believe.
I was informed we can't vote during a workshop, and so we're trying to do this so that y'all have that set for the workshop next week.
We haven't done it that way before, I don't believe.
They're needing direction on which of the providers to pick and to actually award the RFP, so we would need to do that in advance. Typically in the budget workshops, we just are given general direction, and then budget feeds that into the budget that is then presented and voted on in September.
So if I'm understanding right, sorry, I think you're saying, do we have to settle on the 2.5% or 5%? We do not have to settle on that. We just have to award the RFP so that we can move forward. We can discuss how we fund that at the general fund workshop. We wanted y'all to have that information as quickly as possible ahead of that, so that that could be in your mindset as we prepare for the general fund workshop. But no,
Okay,
we
so
don't
right
have to
now,
set those
all we're
rates
doing
today.
is to execute an RFP.
So this
Period.
part.
Tina has some comment or question.
I was just going to mention that we usually do have this information for the general fund workshop, just so that when we show you the calculator and what we have left for marginal revenue, we kind of know what that is, and so council has a good idea of what we have available for other projects or ideas.
Exactly.
This will be more like the process that we had back in 2019.
No, but
because we're awarding a bid, and we only do that every 3 years. Okay. So normally it is slightly different. But again, we wanted y'all to have that information going forward into that workshop. But this agenda item 6A2, we do need a motion on that so that we can select those providers and get going on that.
So the motion is only about the RFP, putting one out there for selection, not about any of the details within the presentation.
We've already put the RFP out. It's actually about selecting the providers they
Awarding the
discussed
bid.
today.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to award them.
Okay, so then is there a recommendation for awarding it?
Yes, the recommendation is Lincoln for dental, is Symetra for life and AD&D, and is Aetna Shannon for health, pharmacy, and clinic.
Do I have a motion for those vendors as he just presented?
So moved.
By Tommy.
And I will second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second. Any public comment? Seeing none, we will take a vote on that. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0. Next, we will have a discussion and direction regarding the Charter Review Committee's presentation, and I think we have many folks in the audience for this today, but Judge Gilbert, you're the spokesperson. You're on.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Our committee that you put together a selection of council members to work on and to look at the elected versus the appointed chief charter revision is here with us today, and I want to introduce each one of those to you so that you know who each one of those are. I want to tell you that all my years of public service working with the city, I've been on a lot of committees, never been on one that worked as hard as this committee. So let me happily introduce to you our committee members. We have Candy Poole, of course, Billy. I believe everybody knows Billy DeWitt.
Billy.
Jeff Curry, Mark Lack, and J.J. Graham.
Thank you for the work.
These committee members have worked extremely, extremely hard, along with your staff, and I want to mention your staff. Teresa and Julia and Heather were with us in every meeting. They worked very, very hard with us. They never tried to persuade us in any direction, but they gave us all the information that we needed and worked very hard. And we had a lot of homework to do. This committee had a lot of homework to do, and as you can tell by looking at them, they hadn't done homework in a long time, so it wasn't real easy for us to get all that done. And we've developed this kind of relationship that I can say those kind of things, I believe. So, but our purpose on our let me get this thing working Okay. Our charter purpose that we had, our committee purpose that we had that was given to us by you as the city council was to evaluate the elected and the appointed chief and to provide a recommendation back to you. Each member of this committee, some of us came in with preconceived notions of what we thought should happen. And so we had long talks about that, and everyone committed to look at this with an open mind, a complete open mind, because we want to look at one thing, and that is what's best in the best interest of the city of San Angelo. And that's where we went to. You gave us a very simple chore, elected versus appointed. You know, if you talk to people in San Angelo, there's two things that you can get somebody from San Angelo really fired up about. That's football and the elected chief. And this committee has found that going out into the public and talking to people about this, sometimes they needed bodyguards. Because people tell you, and that's okay. That's what we want to hear, is we want to hear what people have to say. And so we took a very long look at a lot of things. Let me tell you what we did. In our process that we had, we spent 5 weeks. We were told we want to try to be ready in case there's a November election to make a decision on this. So we had 5 weeks to do this. So this committee met twice a week, at least 2 hours every meeting, and then they did their homework. And we went through a lot of things. We talked to individual people. We spent over 16 hours just in meetings. We spent over 20, 30 hours in talking to individuals. We looked at Section 60 and 64 of the city charter. We reviewed the state and local statutes, the Texas Local Government Code 143 of civil service that controls the police department and the chief, the Texas Government Code 142, meet and confer. We looked at all that. We looked at the San Angelo civil service regulations. We interviewed elected and appointed officials, and we did informal conversations with people throughout the community. So to tell you what we did so that you know that we didn't just sit in there and talk about this is what we've heard, we went and found the facts. We looked into the facts. And we did talk a little bit about what we heard. But let's look at the San Angelo City Charter. The city charter was created to have the elected police chief for the city of San Angelo. 61 says that the chief shall have been a resident of the city of San Angelo for a period of at least 2 years immediately prior to his election and shall possess the qualifications of electors in said city.
So are you telling me that the only 2 qualifications to run for chief of police is they have to have lived in this city for 2 years?
Be an elector.
And
Yes, ma'am. You must have been looking at my paper. I've got that written down right here.
just making sure.
That's correct. And that the term of the chief is going to be for 4 years. Those are the requirements. That's it.
Is there an age requirement?
You have to be an elector, so you got to be 18.
Just to say that specifically.
You have to be 18 years of age. You have to be a resident of the city of San Angelo for a period of at least 2 years prior to your election. That are the only requirements that there are to run for chief of police.
So there's no experience required?
No, ma'am. So when we looked at those and we kept going through the city charter and looking at what are the other requirements that we have or anything that we have in the city charter, we have Section 63, which is the duty and the powers.
Judge Gilbert, may I just stop one moment? Because I think what we did, I don't know if you said as part of your committee members, David Howard, because I think he's in the back of the room.
That's right. We have
and
David
I want to
Howard.
make sure everyone understands that we had representation on this charter committee as well from the police department.
Yes, David Howard, he's the assistant chief of police, and he was with and sat with the committee each and every meeting, and he added a lot of information, gave us a lot of things, and we very openly, and you would think it's kind of hard because there's a policeman sitting right there that's assistant chief, but he was very good about taking everything that came at him, and he came back at us. So it made for a real good situation in our committee. It really worked out really well. Okay, 63 says that, let me get to 63 here. It shall be the duty of the chief of police to preserve law and order within the city of San Angelo, and especially to enforce the ordinances of said city. That's the duty and the powers. The authority under 64 says that the chief shall have the exclusive control of the police department of the city of San Angelo and shall have the right to select, employ, discharge at will, and prescribe the salaries within the monetary limits fixed by the city budget, the employees in such department. So we have 63 and 64, the duties and the authority, and through our research, we find that under authority that this statement is not correct. That it is not correct, and I will explain to you why here in just a moment. Then we looked at the Texas Local Government Code 143, Civil Service Statute. And under that, it provides for appointed chiefs. Under that statute, it does not provide for elected chiefs. It provides for appointed chiefs. And it sets the
Well,
minimum.
that's totally in contradiction.
Yes, ma'am. The civil service provision, not really contradiction, it's just there's not a provision here for elected chief. There's a provisions for appointed chief. And one of the reasons why that is that we are the only city in the state of Texas that has an elected chief. Now, there may be another small one out there somewhere we didn't find, but as far as we know, we are the only city in the state of Texas that has an elected chief. And so that's why there is no state law that authorizes chief of police. We have state laws that authorizes the sheriff's department and the election thereof, but chief of police, because they can be done through charter, you can have a charter that provides for elected chief just like we have. You can have ordinances that give this authority. And so it's not mandatory or required that you have to have a state statute in order to have an elected chief of police. Now, through the years, as most of y'all know, I was with the city for almost 50 years, and I watched a lot of elected cities slowly turn into appointed. And so that's happened through the years until the point that within the last 12 years, there were 3 left. Now, according to the information we have, there's 1 left, and that's us. So that's why you don't see provisions in state law, provisions in the civil service, because there are no other departments other than us.
How does that work then with civil service? Teresa, I mean, how does that legally work?
Basically, civil service, as the judge will go through, talks about how the benefits and rights of the officers. There is a reference, very brief in civil service about elected, but it talks about if you're going to have an appointed chief, this is how they have to be appointed, and that's appointed by city manager and confirmed by council. So, and then it's like, unless elected is the only part that it says in civil service rules. So what the judge is saying is that it talks about how the chief is selected in an appointed system, but does not have any reference at all to qualifications or anything related to an elected system.
That's there. All right, let's move on to, that was the local government code of civil service. So let's move to 142, which is the provision for meet and confer. And y'all are very familiar with meet and confer, some of you are, and we have that in our police department, but we are a city, at this time, I believe they call it meet and confer without a contract. So we're operating now under civil service in the city of San Angelo because civil service was adopted back in the 1960s by the city of San Angelo. So we operate under civil service, and then provisions come in meet and confer, then you'll operate under provisions of meet and confer and civil service. So
Pretty confusing.
Yes, ma'am. Believe me, you can ask these people. We went, and I'm liable to get some of this wrong, so I apologize if I do, but we found there's a lot of complications and a lot of things. But that's going to be whether we have an elected police chief or an appointed police chief, because these are just the provisions that affect and how our police department is operated. All right, so let's move on and tell you a little bit about the people that we interviewed, because we spent a considerable amount of time talking with them. As you'll see on here, we have Frank Carter, who is our current elected chief of police. We have Brian Dunn, who was appointed fire chief for the city of San Angelo for many years. And then we have the appointed police chief from Brownwood, Ed Kading. And so I'll tell you a little bit about each one of these individuals, and I haven't even looked. I'm sure Frank's in the room. I don't see Frank back there, but I've known Frank since he was this big and watched him grow up through the ranks. Well, some of y'all I've done that with too, so I got to be careful, I guess. But watched him come up through the ranks and how he did. And Frank's done a great job. He has done a terrific job as the chief of police for the city of San Angelo. So we got his feeling and what he felt about the elected versus the appointed and being in his position. He surprisingly gave us some information that he thought was important on both sides of the road. We brought in Brian, the appointed police chief, because we wanted to know. We've heard things that say, well, we don't want an appointed person because they're appointed by the city manager, and we don't want them to be just totally under the control of the city manager. And I'm gonna lay the facts out to you. Y'all may not like some of what I'm gonna say, but this is what we are dealing with. And people say they don't want that. Well, we brought Brian in. He says in all this time he's never had problems with city managers trying to control his department. You know, and we know, I know, you know, that can happen, but that can happen with any given thing. So we were able to get information from both sides, from the elected versus the appointed. The reason we asked Mr. Kading to come in for Brownwood, because he is an appointed chief of police in Brownwood. They just a few years back went from elected to appointed. But Ed was also a lieutenant in the San Angelo Police Department who ran for chief of police here and didn't get elected here, but went to Brownwood as chief. So we brought him in to give us perspective of what he's seen since he's gotten there and what is it like, and the information that he told us. And he said that having worked in both systems, even though as an appointed chief, Ed says that, you know, you can have problems with people not liking you there, still trying to go to the city council, go to the city manager, but that's going to be in any job. That can be in Teresa's job, that was, and my job as the judge and the assistant city managers. Those things can happen regardless. That's not going to be just the chief of police that situation happens in. But Ed was very happy with working with an appointed system, and he did tell us the good things about the elected, that he thought, the few things that he thought was there. So we heard both sides of everything that everybody had to say and questioned them at length of what their feelings were and the facts, not only just their feelings. Now, we went out and talked to people in the community, and here's one of the first things we got from their responses, as you will see, is that they said, not again. When we talked about elected versus appointed, does it need to go to an election? Not again. It's been up for election several times. And I think the last time, and I may get this wrong, but I believe it was 73% to stay elected in the city of San Angelo. So one thing that we as a committee talked about is we may have feelings about how we would like to see it in the city of San Angelo. Maybe we want it to be elected, maybe we want it to be appointed, but what it boils down to is what the public, what they want, what the community, what the citizens of San Angelo want. Because they told us that they didn't trust the city government. That was one of the biggest things we heard. The city runs on a buddy system with self-interest of city management and taking priority over city needs. The city just wants to appoint someone that'll do their bidding. An elected police chief is free to do whatever he wants, when he wants, and he only answers to the voters. And that the city wants to control the police budget. We already control the police budget. But I'm telling you, these are the main things that we heard from people.
When they say that the police chief only answers to the voters, what does it take? What percentage of the voters would it take to recall a police chief?
The recall provision that I'm familiar with speaks directly to the mayor and the city council members. For a city council member, it would be, city council and mayor, 30% of the registered voters.
But it it's not specific about a police chief? So, and I ask because if someone was trying to get signatures or whatever happens.
I think it would be the same, but I'm not sure, but
As we go through it, there's a number of areas where the police chief just isn't anticipated to be the same. So we would follow the same process for recall, but of course, without any precedent or any direct language in our charter to address that, that would be something that could be open to challenge.
we're going to address that just a little bit here in a second, but we wanted you to hear the comments that we heard from some of the people. And so, and we brought these questions forward in the committee also. And, you know, not again, yes, we've had an elected system for 70 odd years now in the city of San Angelo. And so there's a lot of, we just grew up with this system. There's a lot of that. It's just, that's the way it has been. That's the way it should be. I'm not, the distrust in government, I'm not so sure. I can tell you that I've heard that in my whole career, my whole life. When I was on the city council in 1974, all the way through, you hear that, but you really don't, there's not factual stuff there. But that's something that we do here. The city runs on the buddy system. Hey, there's been some good old boy stuff through the years. I will guarantee you that is, I've seen that. They want to appoint somebody to do their bidding. I don't really see that factor. The chief of police is free to do what he wants with the department. That's absolutely not true. There are controls in civil service and city ordinances and things that give control to that. And so, but here's what we found was the other side of this. That when we talked with people, most of it was shock and sometimes disbelief at the lack of qualifications required for a person to run for chief of police, indicating that several people, some of the people that talked to other people said, well, you could run, or I could run, or this, and yes, if you politically you're astute, you can do that, and you have enough money, you can do that. We've been fortunate. The majority of the police chiefs that we've had, I think I went through there are 11 or 12 chief of police in my career. And most of those were extremely good chief of police. We've been very fortunate with the majority of our police chiefs that have come through, and they did a great job. And most of them have been people that were qualified and had the things that were necessary in order to be the chief of police. The lack of knowledge about how the chief's duties are regulated by federal and state law was another thing that people said. They had no idea. They thought the chief of police could, I can hire them, I can fire them, I can do whatever I want, they can do this and that. And in our findings, we found under the elected chief of police, the requirements did not include prior police experience. The chief, due to civil service statutes and meet and confer, does not have exclusive control over the department and its employees. The elected chief divides the department during the election period, which begins once an officer announces their candidacy. An elected chief who is also legal as a city employee is exempt from discipline when it comes to violations of rules and policies.
Explain that.
Well, meaning that because they are elected, they don't fall under the same classification or category that Julia does or Teresa does or Rick does, that they're elected. So therefore, if they do something wrong, the only way that it can something be happened is through your recall petition to get them out of office. There is no provision, correct me if I'm wrong, no provision for suspension, removal, administrative leave, any of these type of things because of the elected chief, correct? So you have,
Shocking.
ma'am?
That's pretty
Yes.
shocked.
So, so as you can see, those are the things there that provided because they're not appointed, that it opens the door to a lot of areas. And so, and I'm not trying to tell you right now, elected or appointed. I want y'all to know this. I'm giving you the facts as we found them from the committee.
If you had an appointed chief of police, which of these things would change?
If you had an appointed chief of police, there would be requirements. The The duties of the chief and the authority of the chief are going to stay the same whether they're appointed or whether they're elected, because civil service, meet and confer, and the laws provide for what those are. That's not just an open door. That's going to be the same regardless. Elected chiefs divide the department. We wouldn't see that because of the election. There wouldn't be that election. But there is something else I'll get to in a minute on that. As an appointed, then you would also have the provision of suspension, removal, things of this nature that you don't have under the elected system. So we found under the appointed chief of police, the civil service statute defines minimum requirements for an appointed chief, so you have minimum requirements before you can be appointed.
What would they be?
If we could hold 1 second, I believe it's about 2 down. Okay? The chief of police under civil service and meet and confer is going to be the same with appointed. The police department would not be divided in ranks during election, but may be united in its disdain for the selection of the appointed chief. I mean, they could still be upset because they didn't like who the city manager and the city council appointed. So there could still be that, but you wouldn't have 9 months, 8 months, 6 months of political election time going on during that.
Did you hear comments about how divided the police department becomes during election time period because people choose sides. So how disruptive is that?
We did hear that, yes, ma'am. We did hear that that is pretty much the norm. I will tell you this, that with our last chief, Frank, that's come in, probably the least amount of that I've ever seen. I have honestly seen it. Being around, as the judge, I was probably the closest city employee to the police with being outside of that. There's been a lot of that in the past where if you support the wrong candidate, you might get moved to nights or you might get moved to the basement to do evidence or things of this nature. That has happened. That has happened at certain times. So yes, that's there. Okay, here's kind of a comparison here for the research findings. Elected chief is 2 years residency, 18 years old, not a felon, not mentally incapacitated. You have to be an elector versus appointed, which the minimums there are 5 years as a licensed police officer, a TCO intermediate certification. That's the minimum requirement under civil service.
And what's that, TCO?
Texas Commission on Law Enforcement. Okay, and these requirements are set up in civil service.
But they're not required of an elected chief.
They're not required as an elected chief, yes, ma'am.
And you don't have to be a licensed police officer to run for police chief.
No, one thing we found out, you don't even have to have a Texas driver's license. So,
Tom, did you have a comment on that? I heard something.
I have a son who's fixing to graduate, and I'm fixing to throw his hat in the ring here.
Tom could be police chief?
No.
Okay. So as you can see, I'm giving you both sides of this for you to look at here. And I guess what it all boils down to is the reason you wanted us to come here today was to give you a recommendation. Well, as I stated, we've had 5 weeks. We've had a lot of work. We've talked to a lot of people. This committee, they've done such a terrific job of discussing everything we just talked about, discussing every bit of it. And believe me, they took both sides. And I can tell you that 2 of them, that I'm not going to say which 2 because I haven't even told them this, but in my mind, I feel like they were totally on one side. And then as of the last couple of weeks, they were right in the middle, just like me, because the first thing I told this committee when they asked me to be chairman was, okay, but you got to understand, I'm not crazy. I'm going to argue both sides. And I look up now, and every member of this committee argues both sides. They argue both sides. And I think that's something that's great because we're not just looking at one side. But the recommendation that we have for you today, we're not going to recommend that we have an elected or an appointed. Right now, we're going to recommend that give us some more time. You know, you have an election coming up in November, but we also have an election coming up in May. From what we've been told from the community, from what we've heard, and we've talked to we're not talking about we talked to 10 people. We've talked to a lot of people. And what we find is, well, first off, I'm going to ask y'all, how many of y'all knew civil service overruled most things that the chief of police could do? Did anybody know that? Okay. Did anybody know about meet and confer overrules a whole lot of things that the chief can do? And the chief's not even involved in
I
that.
just didn't know what those were.
Okay, all right. Okay, so I'm talking to you as the city council and the mayor. Do you know how many people in the public knows that information? You know, we haven't found anybody that really does that hasn't been involved.
I don't think you probably found many people who understood how the qualifications were so nothing.
That's right. That was a major factor. I can tell you, Candy, everybody that Candy talked to just about, that was their major deal right there. Because every meeting she would go up, talk to 3 more. Guess what they said? And so, but here's what we were recommending, and I've got it written down here, but I'm just going to tell you from the heart. We need to talk to the public. We need to inform, I'm not going to say educate, we need to inform the public of just more than what I've informed you today, because believe me, we can go on for another 30 or 40 minutes. We need to inform the public, and whichever way the public wants to vote on this, that's their job. But I believe they need to vote after they are informed. Now, this committee, and we have totally agreed to this, we are not going to recommend one side or the other to the public until we have received all of our information back from the public of what they want, after they've had a chance of being informed. So, what we want to do is we want to ask you to let us have until January to come back with a recommendation that would go on the May election. And in this period of time, we want to develop a public outreach and public education plan to inform the citizens of San Angelo of this extremely important project. We want to elicit feedback from the public so that we can develop our recommendations. And here's our potential program that we want to do. We want to work with the local media to distribute all this information. Social media is how you get it done in today's world. We want to host a town hall meeting, maybe 1, maybe 2, whatever it takes. We want to work with the communications department, with the city. I think Teresa and them and Julie have already talked to Brian about helping us with doing this. We want to do a social media outreach. We want to use Channel 17. We want to provide bilingual. We want to provide as much information that is information, not a political campaign for or against. We want to provide information to the public that allows them to receive this, and then they can vote informed.
One thing that I might have missed, and you might have covered it, but because we elect, what we also find is that most of the candidates are within our current police department.
Yes, ma'am.
So you don't have people from other cities who might have terrific experience or good experience coming into our city to run, because it does become more of a popularity contest with credentials than, and so your candidates all come from a pool of existing police officers,
Yes, ma'am.
primarily.
Yes,
Is that
ma'am.
correct? Did you talk about that earlier?
Yes, no, I didn't, but we did discuss that and one thing for your information, if we used the minimum, just for example, we went to an appointed, and let's say that we used the minimum standards that civil service has here. And I may be wrong on this number, but my understanding was that Dave gave us information, and maybe the chief did, that we have roughly 70 officers that would qualify to be appointed to the chief of police coming from this unit. Okay?
Great.
And we even looked at, well, what if the qualifications were this, this, and this? And it was even, we had 60 officers in our department that would be eligible for appointment as the chief of police if you made those requirements. Because we got requirements, qualifications from cities all over the state and looked at those. Not just, we didn't just look at civil service. Teresa and them got us this information. We looked at it, and we felt like if we were going to do this, it had to be raised. So we have already looked at both sides of this picture. What we would do if we came back and recommended elected, what we would do if we had to come back and do appointed. We have some thought processes here that we want to that we would lay out.
I think also, I think most of us sitting up here would also say that this isn't about the current police chief. There's, as you said before, Chief Carter's done a terrific job as police chief.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
this conversation has not come up because of his performance. I think everyone here would say he has strong support from the public and from council. So this isn't about our current police chief,
has-
and we just need to be
no.
very loud and very vocal about that.
Yes, it has, and the committee itself, we made that, I believe we made that clear the first day. The very first day, we made that clear that this has nothing to do with the current administration. Police chief, assistant chiefs, it has nothing to do with them. This is a matter of, as a community, for us to look at what direction do you want to head in.
Okay, I'm just going to ask each council member if there's questions for Judge Gilbert or any comments, so everyone has a chance to voice something. I'm going to start with Tommy.
Thank you, Mayor. Alan, did y'all talk about if we felt that it was important to address the lack of qualifications for police chief, be it elected or appointed? If we wanted to do something about that now, how would we go about inserting into what the framework we have right now? How would we go about inserting that into the process?
We knew that was going to be a question, Tommy, and I appreciate you bringing it up. Yes, sir. If, let's just say for if right now, and we give a lot of ifs, let's say we were to be going to Fallerhead and going into November for the election, okay? If you wanted to put on the ballot and say, we're going to keep an elected chief, but we're going to require that they have these qualifications, let's say a master's under TCO, 10 years experience, have been a supervisor, have been a commander, and I'm just throwing out some stuff here to you. But you could put all those in there, requirements, Texas driver's license. You could put all those requirements in there, and then it could be voted as an amendment to the charter, and then your next elected police chief would have to meet these standards in order to be elected, yes.
That was my main question.
Thank you, Tommy. Tom?
You know, Alan, the thing we look at here and being an advocate of looking at this process, and we can't thank the charter group enough for going through what they're going through, but I've had lots of phone calls on this, and I put the scenarios in front of them, and I say, the purpose of this charter, one thing is to take, and they've heard me say this before, it's kind of to take the politics out of public safety. And with that, I don't know how that agenda moves forward, but I thank y'all for doing what you're doing, but I want to say my question to the group is the majority of the objections you have to this, is it from people not knowing the entire situation and how this goes? Because I would say the 10, 15 people I've talked to after I explained to them kind of the purpose of looking and going down this path is the more they learn about it, the more open they are to the other side. Is that what you found?
Come on up, Mark.
Come on up. Come on up.
Come on up, get a turn at the mic.
You need to be on the microphone.
This is Mark Lack.
Hi. In my personal conversations, I'm not going to say exactly who, but everybody in this room knows who I have spoken to. Even they, when I gave them the qualifications, they got shocked. So it wasn't just a typical person in the grocery store that we may say, you know, did you know that your 18-year-old child can now run for chief of police? And actually, I would tell people that. My daughter's, who's about to turn 18, will be eligible to run. And I said, she even laughed at that and thought that was hilarious. And I said, no, that according to our city charter, that is correct. If you talk to people who have been involved in our city government, they are shocked at those lack of qualifications. So it's not just one or two people that we've talked to, it's people who we would expect to be well-informed are completely uninformed as to the process to elect our chief of police.
Thank you for those comments. Tom, you're good? Harry?
Tom.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry,
No, go ahead.
Judge Mayor. I'm sorry, Mayor. What you're saying is exactly what we're saying from the committee. We're saying that the public hasn't been informed. Of all these years that it's come up for election, never has there been a situation that allowed for information to be given out to the public. It's always put on the ballot as appointment, yes or no, or election, yes or no. And there's never been, as far as I know, a committee like this that is willing to go out and do these type of meetings to inform the public, inform the citizens of what we've just informed you of. And you're absolutely correct. There's some things in here I didn't know. And there's some things in here y'all didn't know. So we know they don't know. And they may know it and still decide they want to go one way or the other. But my requirements of everything in my life has always been, before you make a decision, become informed. And that's what we want our public to be, is informed. And if they're informed however they decide it, then that's the right way. But they have the right to be informed.
Thank you. Harry?
Yes, I'll reiterate a little bit about what Tom said. I certainly appreciate people that are sitting on this Charter Review Committee. I actually had the opportunity to serve on the last one 7 years ago. And one of the things that we were not able to accomplish, because we didn't do a very good job of getting the public educated, was to talk about an appointed chief. That didn't pass the last time. So I want to say thank you. I appreciate it, and I agree with what you've recommended here, and that is, let us educate the public. Let us get out there and do that, so we don't have to rush into this thing in November. Personally, I would rather make sure that every citizen had the opportunity to learn what's going on and to be educated before they went out and voted. So I want to say thank you. Also want to say, go back and say this again, one of your first slides that showed the qualifications. All you got to do is live in San Angelo for 2 years. You do not have to be a police officer. If you've got the time and want to run, then if you win, the only thing that you've got to do is become a certified certified peace officer within 12 months. I mean, and that's state law.
Is that part of our charter? I see
no,
people.
that's statute.
Okay, but
I think what they have to do is they have to become a chief administrator of and Tracy and David might be able to help with this, but the chief administrator, there's this course for that, and they need to complete that course. But I do not believe that requires being a peace officer.
Certified peace officer, not a police
Different
officer,
things.
peace officer.
Peace officer, right. I do not believe it requires that. You just have to become a chief administrator. And there are situations where police chiefs are purely administrative and run the department, and they don't do the law enforcement work, but.
Okay.
So with that, I just hope that we can get to the spot where people understand what we can do. I offer one other suggestion that I've offered to the city manager for years, and that is, if the citizens still do not trust City Hall to appoint a police chief that would run this particular city, maybe they should look at appointing a police commission, not a police commission, I want to say safety commission, that looks at the fire chief, the police chief, and the emergency manager. I mean, there's other ways to do this, and I just offer those suggestions. But anyway, we can look at those things. Thank you.
Lucy?
Excuse me, Mayor,
Yes.
may I address that
Yes.
with Harry right quick? Under the civil service provisions, because we talked about this, exactly what you said, civil service provisions, if you go to appointed, is going to be city management appointment with consent of council, because that's requirements under the civil service.
There are some cities that within the state of Texas that have police or safety commissions, one of them.
They can, but I have to let Teresa address this more, but that's the requirements that are set up under the city, civil
Yeah, this
service.
gets down the road someplace else.
Yes.
Lucy?
Oh, I just want to thank you for every one of y'all for your past, present, and future time that you're putting into this. It is much appreciated, and we thank you for the information that y'all are bringing to us.
Karen?
I won't waste any more time. The good questions have come from the colleagues on the other side of the table, so thank you for your wisdom and prudence in the recommendations that you're making going forward. I appreciate that.
Larry?
I could first of all say ditto to everything that's been said, but now the question is, who's going to create the prerequisites?
Who's going to create what, sir?
Who's going to create these prerequisites if we do it for elected?
Meaning what it would still be, this committee would also come back and recommend to us what the language for qualifications that would still have to be voted on by the public because it's part of the city charters. So this same committee, if they chose to not change it to appointed but elected, would also have to come up with those because it would have to be part of that language for the vote.
Okay. Yes. And last of all, some folks may have a fear that if you stack the prerequisites too severely, you're eliminating part of the potential field for folks to run for office, for this office.
You'd certainly use other cities, and you're not just going to throw darts at things and come up with them. We would have to use other cities' requirements and knowledge and information about all of this. We're not going to. We're not going to try to make it an impossible feat. We need a strong police chief. We need someone elected or appointed to follow in Frank Carter's steps because he has done a great job and he could be a great source of information to anybody elected or appointed, just as his assistant police chiefs could be as well.
And as I said earlier, we have looked at all these requirements. And if we were to go to the top level of requirements, we would still have roughly 60 police officers in San Angelo that would be eligible. So that would not be.
That says a lot. That's great.
Yes, that says a lot for our police department. That says a whole lot for our police department.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. So with that, does anyone on the committee, the charter committee, want to come forward and offer any other comments or say anything before we go to a vote? Doesn't look like anyone's coming forward. Yes, okay, so then with that, I think what I need is a motion to delay or put May in as the time period for a potential election on this issue. What do we need, Julia?
We have this posted as discussion and direction, so if the council, I think we have a consensus that you'd like the committee to come back in January with a final recommendation. I think that'll be good.
All right, is there anyone opposed to that or any further comment? All right, so I think you all have direction from us, and as a final, thank you for what you've done, the work you've put in, and the work you're going to be putting in, because it's not over yet. So thank you very much. All right, with that, it's 10:07. We are going to take a break. We'll be back at around 10:15. Okay, if everyone could please come back, sit down. Council members come back. And some of the charter committee members, would you please stay just for a few more minutes, only because I think we had people who wanted to offer some public comment. So I think it would be great if you could stay just a few more minutes, if you don't mind. Okay. Tommy needs ice. And not ice as in law enforcement ice, just the cold kind. All right, we are now open for public comment on the conversation presented by the Charter Committee on elected versus appointed.
Anna Bartosh, SMD1. Just a few things I wrote down, and to me the biggest concern that seems to have been expressed is qualifications. The election process generally flushes that out. As part of the Tea Party, I remember years ago when Frank, our Chief Carter, ran, that was probably our biggest meeting ever. It was packed, and we had all of the candidates for the police chief, and there were a lot of questions. So as far as qualifications, I'm not that concerned. Yes, you could write that in the charter, and that would take care of that and not worry about the elected versus appointed. I don't know how many times this has been before the public, the citizenry of San Angelo, and every single time appointed versus elected has been defeated. It's been several times it's been on our ballots.
I think 11 would be the number.
11 would be that number. With I don't know, 73% in the last election voted.
The point is that it was well stated by Judge Gilbert that even though it was put on a ballot in the past, no one did anything to educate or meet one-on-one with citizens and opened up that conversation.
Okay, and my next concerns are, what are the qualifications of the appointers? The city manager, what's the qualification there? So you're worried about the police chief, and yes, they do need to have qualifications, and I really feel like the election process flushes all of that out, but you can put that in the charter and satisfy everybody. Anyway, those are my comments. And then when you take the power away from the citizenry, which should be in everybody's mind and every decision you make, does this interfere with the power of the people? I would always have to vote no. Thank you.
I think I have a question.
Larry, go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. I mean, here we talked about 18 years old and, you know, the other minimal prerequisites. You're not in favor of eliminating other possible prerequisites for an elected or selected chief of police. Is that correct?
Correct. Correct. If you put it in the charter, then whoever is appointed or elected needs to meet those qualifications.
Thank you.
I'm Vera Kirkpatrick, and I live on Coral Way. And I want to thank the committee. I know I've been on committees, and it's a lot of hard work, so I do appreciate them. To me, the education is very important to educate the public. But also, I think that we need to change the requirements. Every job that I've ever had, you had to have a list of requirements to qualify for the position. But then we don't need to be like other cities. I keep hearing this. So and such city has this and that. We're San Angelo, so let's stay San Angelo. And we don't have to be like everybody else. But let's not take away the power from the people, because today the Marxist agenda is to control everybody, and we do not want to be controlled. So let the people vote. That's what I say. Thank you, City Council, for always listening.
Further public comment? We'll give it a 1, a 2, a 3. Conversation is concluded. All right. Thank you all charter members again, and thanks for hanging around for a few more minutes. We will now move into item C, which is consider approving amendments to the tax increment reinvestment zone incentives policy. John, you're on.
Thank you. John James, Director of Planning and Development Services. This is an item that's coming before you at the recommendation of the TIERS board, some changes to the TIERS policies. And I'll start off by saying this has nothing to do with funding, north, south, any of that. These are policy changes that they've been working on for quite some time. They originally made their initial recommendations back in February. However, they asked us to bring those back. They made a couple of additional tweaks just last month. And so I'll go through kind of an overview of those changes. First of all, there used to be a north and a south, or there currently is a north and a south policy, but the 95% of the words are the same in each. And so we just combined them into one and then made notes where certain provisions only apply to north or south. We also eliminated the 10%, or proposed to eliminate the 10% upfront payment. Right now, if you get funding for TIERS, we give you 10% of the cost of your project upfront, and then once you complete it, you get 90%. And that created basically an extra burden for staff, but also really didn't help the applicant. Oftentimes on most of the smaller projects, it was only a few $1,000s. And so the applicants found that was more hassle for them doing all the paperwork to get the 10%. And so now the proposal is just once you complete the project, you get the 100% back. It also clarifies that matching funds have to be for eligible TIERS costs. So oftentimes we would have applicants submit a big major project that included internal remodeling and all kinds of other things that aren't eligible for TIERS, and they would ask to count that as match. For the last few years, the TIERS board has recommended only counting TIERS eligible expenses as part of that match. And so this just writes that into the policy. But again, they've been doing that for the last few years.
So there's no change there.
No, but it writes it into the policy, so it requires that to be the case rather than just a discretionary decision.
They can't use interior improvements to qualify.
Correct. They actually have to be putting matching funds towards the items, aesthetic improvements or whatever that they're getting the funding for. They also looked at changing, adding the criteria for how projects are decided, and that's largely applies to the South. I mean, technically it applies to both, but in the South, we usually have more projects that apply than the funding we have available. And so the board and you all are tasked with deciding amongst various projects. So for example, in the last funding cycle, I believe we had 16 projects in the South submit. We were only able to provide funding for 8 of those. And so these are the criteria that the board and you all would use to compare different projects compared with each other. And so what the board came up with was that the highest priority should be given to preservation of historic buildings, improvements of facades to make the buildings look nicer, housing, creating housing, and then fire sprinklers. And that's noted because that's one of the changes they made in the past month. Their original recommendation put the fire sprinklers in the medium category.
It's hugely
But
important.
they decided to move that up to the high priority. Medium priority would be things like landscaping, other aesthetic improvements, other than the front facade, and other health and safety improvements other than fire sprinklers. And then lower priority would be other building type improvements as well as signage. And then the lowest priority would be parking lots and paving. And as we'll note in a minute, the paving in the south can't be a standalone project. It would have to be part of a larger project. That's already the case in the policy. And I'd be happy if you have questions about these to stop at any time, but.
Well, go back to that front screen, because the other thing I hear a lot of people ask about is if the dollars, if the improvements are made, is there any expectation in terms of employment? Because we can make a facade nice, but it doesn't change, it doesn't create a business and/or hiring of employees. So even though it improves the overall district, there's some things it doesn't do.
That's one of the recommendations. I think it's on a couple slides down where they made a recommendation somewhat related to that.
I just didn't know where it was going to be put into here.
Yeah, and we'll get to that piece.
Yes, go ahead.
I have a question. On John, this may be a far-fetched question, but let's say someone that was going to apply for tiers had already done much of the work with their own funds, and really the only thing they had remaining was a parking lot. Does that still then push them to the lowest priority category if all they have to work on is their parking lot?
It would if they're in the south. Again, it's on an upcoming slide, but one of the recommendations of the board was to allow parking lot improvements in the north without it having to be part of a larger, project with buildings and landscaping and other things. But yeah, in the south, given that there's a relative lack of funds and so many projects requesting it, the board's belief was we want to be improving buildings. We want to be getting buildings occupiable. Somebody resurfacing a parking lot is not the highest priority, in their opinion.
Lucy?
You just answered my question. It was about the parking lots, and it was about the north side that has been in need of a lot of parking lots redone. So they would be eligible regardless, because of the priority, it being the lowest, they would be up there to be able to be approved.
It would, and again, though, these are for you and the board to judge projects against each other. There's nothing that requires you to, if there's a facade improvement, you have to fund that one over a landscaping project. If you all believe a landscaping project on a particular business is really more important than an aesthetic improvement to a building, that's really a discretionary decision. This just gives some guidelines, and it also gives, one of the things we heard from applicants is we feel like the board and council's decisions are kind of willy-nilly, even though there were some criteria. This fleshed out that criteria a little more so applicants know a little better of what the priorities are and
They
expectations.
need to know going into it. Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And this is, it lists some other considerations that the board felt were important to consider. For example, on aesthetic improvements, if there's a building that's already nice and they're just making some additional improvements, that would be weighted lower than a building that really looks bad and is being really improved. So a building that's falling down, for example, that would get higher weight to improve it. Higher priority for visible improvements. We had a project a year or two ago. They were putting windows in the alley side of a building, and the board went back and forth on that. They ended up recommending funding of it, but they wanted to include this, that if we have two projects, one is improving the front facade in the downtown and one is improving windows in the back that can't be seen from the street, then the front facade should be more important. Higher priority for existing or planned occupancy versus speculative. That gets to the mayor's point. If there's a tenant already in the building or there's an identified tenant going into the building as part of the remodeling project, then that would get higher weight than somebody who just wants to improve it but doesn't have anybody lined up to go in.
Speaking of that, are there And I believe there should be criteria as it relates to things like if I want to do what you just said, improve my facade just so I can get my building sold. So is there a limitation in terms of if you get tiers funding, the time frame that you have to hold on to that building before you can sell it? Because that's the other issue is, are you doing it to be a part of the economic redevelopment of downtown, which maybe you would say if you sold it, it would be because somebody else might do more for it. But what is the criteria used for that issue, getting money but immediately turn it around? Because I think you had a couple cases a couple years ago that's exactly what happened.
There currently is no requirement for that. In fact, we have had some projects where the person already had the buyer identified, but the tiers improvements were part of basically the sale of that property. I'll improve it and then sell it to you, and you'll open a business in it, and it's sort of partnership between the buyer and the seller. So I'm not sure we would want to preclude that kind of activity, but at the current time, there's no obligation to hold on to the building for any period of time.
And the other question would be, if today you are a taxable entity, you are not a nonprofit, but you apply for tiers today, you get the money, you make the improvements, and then a year or less, or a year, you then make your facility a nonprofit.
That is not currently addressed in the policy.
It needs to be.
That's something that you all could add a requirement for that. We'd have to think through how that would be, how it would be written into it. But I guess it would be a similar provision that per the agreement, they would
remain taxable on the tax rolls. Now, they could release it to anybody, and that doesn't change it. But the other issue is if you have a tenant in a taxable property who is nonprofit, and there's $1 million spent to improve the facility that is going to be leased to a nonprofit, does that $1 million become a part of a increase in the taxable value of that property, or does that $1 million to improve a nonprofit who's the leasee stay with that, not with the property itself?
It would affect the property value and therefore the taxes. The fact that it's a nonprofit, if they're leasing, my understanding is the ownership of the building still pays property taxes on the building. They also identified a priority for projects that expand the tax base. That's a little bit subjective because sometimes you don't know. But the idea is if you're comparing two projects and you know one is going to create jobs and expand the tax values of the property, and the other one you're not sure, then that could be a factor.
So does that mean it should say higher priority for projects that expand tax base and employees?
It could expand tax base and
Be
employment.
one way you could incorporate it.
And these are just an overview of what the board did at their meeting just this past month. As I mentioned already, they moved fire sprinklers to the high priority. In the north area only, they added the provision that parking lot improvements could be a standalone project. They also recommended eliminating the annual application cycles. Right now, we open the applications like in November, and all the people who want to apply have to apply within the month of November or with the deadline in December. And then they're all reviewed at once. And that's largely because in the South, there were too many projects and not enough money, so we wanted to compare them all at the same time. In the North, because of the funding that's available and the relatively fewer number of projects, the board didn't see any reason to make them wait till November or May.
That's a great
and so the
decision.
change would allow North applicants to apply at any time.
That's good. Yes, just Tom.
John, on the parking lot, would we not want part of the parking lot to be part of a building too? I mean, part of an establishment that's there. I mean, it almost had to be on the same plat because you wouldn't want somebody buying property right beside it and just wanting. I kind of have a little bit of a problem of just resurfacing a parking lot, whether I buy it or not. Now, if it's a parking lot of my business, I'm good with that.
I think that's a good point, and I think it must be specific that it says a parking lot attached to a business.
I don't know if I'm making sense there, but I
No,
would
you
hate for
do.
somebody to say, oh, hey, I'm just going to buy that one because I know the city can resurface that. I mean, it's got to be part of the specific plat.
Smart.
We can add that. Now, I wouldn't tie it to the property because we got a lot of properties up there where the legally platted lots, there may be 4 small lots, but it's owned by one person as one business. So technically, in some cases, the parking lot for the business might be on a separate lot.
But it's associated with a business.
Yes.
Building.
Use that language that would say parking lot associated with that business and utilized for that business.
While we're on it, Brent, I mean, we'll just
Yes.
take a break and go back to it. Yeah, I think if somebody gets those funds, they need to, if they sell that business or go it, I mean, we're not against private ownership of trade there, but I kind of have an issue of if the tiers funding goes through, I'll buy it. Well, that needs to be maybe on the buyer instead of the seller. All right, and so I have no problem getting in there and saying there has to be a time that you have to own the period of the business or you refund it, or I don't know. That gets awful sticky in there, but I hate to take the business's money, north or south, and give it to somebody for them to turn around and make a profit in less than.
Well, also, because I could have made the improvement to that building based off of, you might have said, okay, I'm going to give you that money because of what the facade improvements you're going to make, but also because of the business you're projecting to be inside it. Then you sell it 2 months later, and the facade is made, but the business isn't going to happen, doesn't happen, or it's a completely different kind of business.
A follow-on to that.
Yes,
and
Larry.
Maybe this is for Ms. James. Can you write a contract that requires that individual retain that piece of property for any length of time?
We can write that into a contract. How you do that and make it enforceable without spending more money trying to recover the money than the money you're actually giving them is really the trick. But we can make it a requirement, at least set the expectation that the property be retained by a certain owner or as, taxable property for a certain period of time.
I do think that's a good point, though. We've had some issues where people have gotten approval and then not done the work, and even getting the 10% back was a fairly big
Nightmare.
hassle.
Yeah.
And so it would be even worse if we've given them the 100% of the money, and depending on how long we require that they own it, if they sell it within 2 years or whatever, that does add an extra burden to try to collect that money back at that point. So
It's a
just
big
to keep in mind.
Flag on that. The other issue is, and I didn't see it when I was reading this last night, is the time frame in which one must accomplish the improvements. Because we have had properties in the past where the money was given to someone to do something, and 5 years later, we still don't have that money, because that money's been allocated, so we can't use the allocated money, and yet that project was never done. So we need a time limit to which the project must be done.
There is, I believe
I
it's
didn't
3
see it.
years. It's not in this policy, it's in the agreements, our standard agreement we use.
It ought to be in the policy.
No, it sounds
I
a
think it's a
little
long time. I think 2 years at best. 3's too long.
And I'd have to double check that, that's just from memory.
I
but,
didn't see it in this stuff I had on, but doesn't mean I didn't miss it.
I just have a quick question. Hey, yes, what happens if that person dies? I'm serious. I'm coming through thinking, you give them this, they fix it up and everything, and then that person dies and they have to sell it. Whoever is the executor of their will or whatever sells it to somebody else and they don't use it for what it's supposed to. Are you going to hold them responsible?
Well, I mean, we can make this as complicated and difficult as possible, and there's a lot of what-ifs out there that can happen. We can't make this reflective of all what-ifs in life, and I could come up with 7 more real quick.
Well, and
But we have.
I think
Go.
that's original owner.
Yeah.
And so trustee executor states, you just have to manage what the original owner had, but I don't think anybody up here, down there would penalize somebody for croaking.
But again, the kind of the point of the tiers.
I don't know.
We might, just depends who it is.
Depends on who it is.
Is that Rick Weiss? Yeah, I got him.
The point of the tiers funding to begin with is to make improvements to property in the area. And so I'm actually not sure if allowing change of ownership is not a bad thing. We're still getting the property improved. It's still being used for a productive purpose, especially if we include you can't change it to a nonprofit. We're still getting the benefits in terms of tax base and all the purposes for the tiers, even if ownership changes. So
I think we ought to have 18 months.
with no ownership change.
No, I mean 18 months to complete the,
Instead of the 3 years.
yeah,
do
3 years is,
18-month
I mean,
completion.
because the other thing that happened was on that particular project that never got done, again, you ties the money up. And then you have these people applying and you have no money, and then that project doesn't happen or it's delayed. And they can always, which has also been the policy, they always have the opportunity to come back and say, my contractor, that whatever, I need an extension. But I think there needs to be a tighter window for completion.
And if that's your, at the end, when we get to the end, we'll go through
It
those.
sure makes the budget cleaner. I mean, you know, carry on, it sits there, because we've had a lot of people go, well, that's there, and like, no, those are dedicated projects. But I was thinking 24 months, but 18 months, you keep it out of rolling forward 2 to 3 years. So 18 to 20 months is fine.
So we can add an exception if they want to request an extension.
Yes.
There's some sort of.
And that's already the case. In fact, at last month's meeting, we had someone that had some COVID-related supply chain issues and asked for an extension, and that
I
was.
think it ought to be 18 months, not 3 years, and with the opportunity to ask for extension based off of circumstances.
And while we're talking about that, one of the things that was mentioned was ensuring that it remains in a taxable status for a period of time. Do you all have a recommendation of what that time should
10
be?
years.
Did you say 10 years?
I did.
That's a long time.
It is, but you gave money away. I go 10 years.
Well, let's look at both sides of that. I mean, 10 years, I could buy something and then turn around and want to get rid of it in that period of time. But I get that. But I mean, you want them to have it to be there.
Well, it's
So
tax
should the
money.
penalty be if it moves to a nonprofit? At that point in time, maybe you get a certain part back, but the life of businesses on North Chadbourn are quite often less than 10 years. I mean,
Some of them.
Well, yeah, but the 10 years is profit to nonprofit. We're not talking life of business. We're talking from a taxable status to a non-taxable status. That's not applicable to what that business is. We're not saying if you put in, you got $75,000 for a facade, we're not saying you have to hold on to that 10 years. That's not the conversation.
well, but so I'm thinking if there's like the one we have on 19th that we're going to talk about here shortly, if somebody sells their building to somebody that wants to be a church, and they've got some funding, I agree with you. I don't think it should leave our tax rolls, but I'm not for sure 10 years.
Well, 5 years?
5 years is good.
5 years is
Okay.
up.
Minimum.
Minimum of 5 years.
Well, I just don't want us to get caught in something that would, if somebody was going to sell some property and it was valued right to sell it, I know those people buy that.
It's about taxable versus non-taxable because this is tax money. The money in this fund is created by increase in property values.
I'm good with 5.
And also on that, John, as far as enforcing that, that's going to be one thing, we're not going to like go and check constantly. So it's one of those things that typically you either hear about it and then you check into it. I want to make sure.
Small town.
Exactly. So that's the way we would go about it, just so everybody's clear.
Call your neighbor.
We enforce that way, so yes.
Croak, we'll hear about that. Dirty croak.
I think this is the last item. One of the other, as the board was talking about how do we encourage people in the north to use these funds for projects, one of the things we heard from the town hall meetings was that some of these mom and pops of small businesses, even a 10% or a 25% match on a small project was difficult for them to come up with. And so we recommended 2 things here. One is right now, you don't have to have a match if your project is $10,000 or less. We would increase that to $25,000. So in the north, you could do a $25,000 project with no match. It also.
What do you, but when you do that, what we were talking about earlier is instead of 10% of the money, we went to 100% of the money. So would that still be the same policy here, or did that line item apply to north and south?
Yes, that applied to both north and south.
So in this case, okay, we would give them $25,000 up front with no match.
No, I'm sorry.
I'm just making sure.
The 100% is after the project's done. So under this policy as proposed, they wouldn't get any money until they've done everything they promised to do. They have to provide receipts and invoices and all of that. And once we verify it all, then they get the amount of money. We don't give, under this, we wouldn't give anything up front. It would all be a reimbursement at the end.
And so then let me ask you another question, because I think this is the correct thing to do for many people who own properties on Chadburn, for example, or MLK. But if you owned property on Bryant Boulevard and you leased it to a chain, but you're the property owner. For example, if I built a building and leased it to TGI Fridays, but TGI Fridays needs me to improve that building for their purposes. Because I want to protect the small guys, is my point. I want to protect the small guys. And this doesn't differentiate between anybody or anything, and maybe you can't do it. But I just want to be clear, because a lot of the funds that have been spent out of the northern tiers has been for projects on North Bryant Boulevard, 87 North.
I guess the way I would answer that is these are the criteria and the minimums for projects. You all still have discretion. For example, in the last round in the South projects, the board recommended, because there wasn't enough money, they funded the ones they funded at 75% of what they requested.
But if they had funded them at 50%, they might have gotten one or two more people funded.
That's correct, and that's.
They chose to do 75% and eliminate 6 people.
Right, but by the same token, you all could decide, well, if this is going for a chain on Bryant, well, we'll give them less, or we won't give them any money, versus a mom and pop on MLK, you'll give them the full amount. That's all that's still at your discretion to pick and choose projects.
I just want to make sure we protect the MLK types of projects and then North Chadburn types of projects and allow for flexibility for them.
And the second piece of this is where there is a match required on those projects over $25,000, it would be reduced from a 25% match to a 10% match. And I think that was it. Yeah. Are there any other questions you may have?
Well, when I was reading through this document last night, there are a lot of things that they're in red ink that are crossed out, and then there are things that are just red ink that are not crossed out.
Yes, what that is intended to be, that the text in black is what is in the current policy. And so the red, if it's stricken out, it's in the current policy that we're proposing to remove. If it's red, then it's something added that is not in the current policy. So it's an attempt to show you what changes were made so you know the differences of what's already in the policy versus what's been added.
And so everything that I read that's in the red in this document is incorporated. Everything that I've read that's not crossed out and is in red is incorporated in this overview.
Correct. Well, there are items in red that are minor cleanups because, as I mentioned at the beginning, we combined the two documents into one. So there were some cleanups. So that this bullet summary doesn't address everything, but I would say it addresses the substantive issues, not the text cleanup and grammar kinds of changes.
Including signage.
Correct.
Other questions or comments?
Good so far.
Okay, so with that, then, all right, we've given you changes. So the question mark is, do we make a motion to approve this with changes, or do you need to bring it back to us with the changes for a vote?
It's up to you all. I can read
wanna
through the
see it
changes
back.
as I have them, but,
We want to see it come back.
okay, that'll work.
So no action taken.
We can just bring it back when it's ready.
Bring it back with changes. Okay, thank you very much. Item D, first reading and introduction. Oh, wait a minute. No, public comment on this tiers review. If you want to come forward now. Yeah, you could wait, and when we do the final on it, it'll be clearer for you than trying to comment now, which is kind of all over the place in order to comment. So just, it'll probably be within the next month. Okay? All right. Then we go on to, yes, please come forward. Would you talk a little louder, pull that microphone down because we can't quite hear you.
Okay, how's that?
That's great.
Evelyn Smith, SMD5. The last meeting I was here, I think it was July 19th, I asked a question about were there any tiers funds for nonprofit organization. I see this is on the list for nonprofit organization to be funded with some of the tiers, provided with the criteria it has
In the north,
to.
not the south.
I'm
Yes,
sorry,
ma'am.
the north, yes, the north. Was that already on the program? I understand that some things were already put into works back in February. So I guess my question is, so it's already been approved by the Tiers Committee.
Mm-hmm.
It's just on the books to be approved by the City Council on the next time it comes up.
Yeah, if there was additional approvals by the Tiers Board, and it hasn't come before City Council, then it would be on the next City Council meeting, I guess. Is that what you're asking, Evelyn?
Yes.
Okay.
So I just really wanted to understand that, that there is now, like it says, maybe funding for a nonprofit organization, which is actually on the books now. And my question was also, has this always been in?
The North, it was
for the
voted
North?
on in 2017 that the North, which is typically against Tiers policies, but the North could use money for nonprofits. And the reason it was discussed and considered was because the whole idea behind tax increment refinance zone is improvement of properties to add to the tax rolls. So a nonprofit, if there was limitations of money in the North, would fall down into a category of not as important as somebody who had a property that was taxable, just by the nature of we're trying to build a tax increment refinance zone fund balance. But yes.
Good. And last question is, it's been approved to combine the North and South?
No, it hasn't
funds?
been approved to combine the North and South funds. We have not approved that.
Okay, I'm saying it's approved by the tiers, but hasn't been presented to the council to be approved.
No.
So where is it right now?
It has not been approved by this council. It was voted no at last meeting.
Thank you very much.
All right, we will, any further public comment? Okay, then we move on to item D, first reading and introduction of an ordinance amending the budget for the fiscal year beginning October 1, 2021 and ending September 30th, 2022 for grants, capital items, and projects.
Thank you, Mayor. I have, I think, 4 budget amendments for you this morning. The first one, Tina Deersky, Director of Finance, pardon me. The first one is for the Railway Museum of San Angelo. That is a project where they are purchasing fencing materials. The city will fund it and then be reimbursed by the Railway Museum for that one. The second one is a general fund transfer out. This is for police body cameras. This is year 2 of a 5-year contract
that allowed 45 additional body cameras for a total of 190 body cameras for the police department, and this is to pay for that second year. This one is to budget for the most recent street debt issue for the $16 million plus issue cost that was issued earlier this year for street reconstruction and improvements. And finally, WIC received some additional funding for overtime, and so they are just bringing a budget amendment to budget for both the revenue and the expense associated with that.
Questions for Tina from anyone? Yes,
I have a question.
Karen.
So regarding the item governing body cameras, and I'm looking at your.
Yes, ma'am.
So just, can you help me understand, please? I'm looking at this page in the most recent Blue Book that was issued to us, and it shows the amount, $70,067, is already encumbered. You have $336,000 in the account for body cameras. And if you read below, you have a restricted amount of over $500,000 for body cameras. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around all these different numbers that appear to be for body cameras.
Yes.
I'm wondering, why are we going through this process? Why are you asking for money if you already have encumbered dollars? Is there a PO? What's happening?
Back when City Council originally approved the purchase of body cameras for the 5-year period of time, we did allocate over $1 million in funding. It was a fairly expensive purchase, and that is, again, over a 5-year period. So the amount that's restricted within the fund balance there is to make sure that we keep that restricted so that in those years 3, 4, and 5, we have that funding available, as we told council that we would. The first year of this additional amount of the $70,000, the first year was $24,000. Police did pay for that amount out of restricted funds, out of police restricted funds, and said that they would go out for grant funding if they couldn't find grants, and City Council did approve to pay for the additional $70,000 per year for years 2 through 5. So what's in the original budget in Fund 501 is for this current year's amount that was already authorized by City Council a year or two ago. And this is going out for that additional funding where we weren't able to find any grants that would fund body cameras.
Thank you for explaining.
You're welcome.
All right, with that, a motion for approval of the budget amendments.
So moved.
So moved by Harry, seconded by Lucy. Public comment. Seeing none, then we'll take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. We will now move into our closed session, the executive session of the provision of Government Code Title V, Open Government Ethics, Subtitle A, Open Government Chapter 551, Open Meetings, Subchapter D, exceptions to requirement that meetings be open under the following sections. A, Section 551.072, deliberations about real property regarding an easement for AEP, and C, Berberich survey. We are, at this point, adjourned for closed session. Hey, John, can I see you for a minute? We will call this meeting back to order at 11:44 a.m. There's no announcements to be made concerning the executive session, so we will now move into the follow-up and administrative issues. In addition to the nothing from executive session, we will do consideration of approving various board nominations. Keep San Angelo Beautiful, Michelle Barnett, SMD 2, and Sean Stein, SMD 4, both to an unexpired term ending September 2023. May I have a motion for those approvals?
To approve.
Lucy moved to approve, seconded by Larry. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
With none opposed, those nominations are approved. Are there any announcements in consideration of future agenda items? Seeing none, then may I have a motion for adjournment? So moved by Tommy, seconded by Lucy. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned at 11:45 a.m. on August the 2nd.